Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? Welcome back to episode 20 of the Collision Live. As always, Daniel here, and making his triumphant return to the desk.
In the flesh.
The Wile E. Coyote to my roadrunner, Mr. Samuel David Camp.
Good to be here, and thankfully not as much flesh as...
Yeah, not quite as much flesh as we saw of Sam last week, unfortunately. But hey, how you doing? We missed you. I think everyone missed having
I miss being here, and apparently I shouldn't leave you unsupervised with a really...
Yeah, don't leave me
really
alone
crude
with
version of Photoshop.
With Photoshop. But again, we're excited to have Sam back. A lot of interesting stuff to talk about this week in culture. Again, if you guys haven't joined us before, if you're just catching us, what we do every week is we just talk about Christianity and pop culture.
Yeah.
So, we look at maybe some of the biggest news stories that happened, maybe some controversies or things, just sort of how do we navigate, how do we walk through this as a Christian? And then when there's not a big news story, we just look at some kind of general questions. What does it mean to be kind of a Christian in a media saturated digital world? What does that mean for how we live out our faith and engage the world around us? Do the Great Commission and all that stuff. So again, if you guys are watching us live, feel free to jump into the comment section. Let us know, join the discussion, and we can maybe have a bit of a dialogue with some of this. But the first thing, there's a couple interesting things for us to talk about this week. And the first one will require a couple caveats, which we'll get into. But kind of the entertainment culture wars. I guess you hear the phrase culture war thrown around all the time on social media. You hear it thrown around in the church. You hear it thrown around on news. It's all over the place. Again, it can mean a lot of different things. But there was something that kind of caught my attention this last week. And again, not necessarily the event itself, but I think it gives us a good kind of jumping board to talk about kind of from more of a faith-based perspective. And this is, again, the Daily Wire is like a kind of a right-wing conservative media network started by commentator, kind of YouTube celebrity, I guess, Ben Shapiro, kind of political pundit. But the Daily Wire just released their first feature film called Run, Fight, Hide, kind of based on a shooter in a school. It's kind of a thriller, an action movie. So this just released about a week ago, and it's the first film being released in what they're marketing as sort of their budding kind of, what they're hoping to be sort of ultimately rise to the level of the Netflixes, and it's sort of a kind of a hub for kind of conservative based entertainment. Yeah. And again, there's a lot of stuff to dig into with this story, but I guess two quick caveats before we get into it, to cut off maybe some controversies or whatnot. But the first is that neither one of us has actually seen this film, right? I believe. You have to be a subscriber right now to the Daily Wire, and at least I'm not a subscriber. So we have not seen this film itself, so we're not necessarily commenting or commentating on the film. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. If you guys have seen it, I'd be curious to hear what you guys thought of it. And again, the second part of it is that the Daily Wire it's a conservative kind of network media, but it's not necessarily Christian faith-based. Isn't sort of their drive. Again, in the Venn diagram, there's some overlap there. But so some of what what it represents and some of the comments about it they're coming at it from a political bent, which again, we're not necessarily going to go into take that side, but I think there's a lot of parallels to relate it to kind of what is the role of Christians in sort of this tension-based kind of in the world, not of it culture war. So here's a couple of things that not necessarily just the movie itself, but the kind of how they're marketing this new film, and kind of really their whole new initiative to come up with shows and movies. And so this is an article that Shapiro wrote when they were launching the whole network. And he says an interesting thing that I want to get your take on, Sam, but said conservatives, again, you can, for our sake, you can swap that for Christians, have two choices, talking about kind of the culture that we live in, very kind of secular and in a lot of ways anti-conservative, anti-Christian. They can tune it out, or they can find alternatives. He says, now it's time to fight back in culture. It's time to blow up the Death Star that is the left-wing monopoly on entertainment, provide a replacement for your dollars. But I thought it's interesting because, again, there's always that tension of how do you be in the world like Christ called us to be, not of the world. What does that actually look like when it comes to kind of entertainment and pop culture? And he kind of, Shapiro laid out, you have two choices. You can just ignore it, kind of hide away, or you can just sort of come up with an alternative to it. And I think it's interesting because, again, I don't know if I agree with that, but what are your...
Well, I mean, I guess that you can first push back on the assumption that it's a binary choice. Like, are those the two choices? I guess would be my first question. Like, is it either make something, like make an alternative to it or ignore it? Like, I tend to be a bit skeptical if it's like, here are the options and it's two. And it's like, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I mean, I see what he's saying. But I don't know that it's just like if you want entertainment, you got to make your own that, serves your political purposes or that suits your worldview taste.
Yeah, because you definitely, this is sort of, again, coming at it like from a political bent, but this same discussion has been happening for a while from a kind of a faith-based perspective as far as, like with Christian films and stuff, is it, do you just ignore Hollywood? Just put your, like an ostrich, put your head in the sand. This is going to, it doesn't matter. It's just movies. They're not important. Or do you create sort of a kind of a subculture or alternative of Christian media? Is there some middle ground?
What I would say is there's obviously a market for a subculture of like conservative entertainment or really not just conservative, but any like just through the spectrum, like, I think there's a market for, obviously, for like faith-based films. I think there's probably a market for sort of more conservative, right-wing leaning films. I think there's a market, obviously, for left-wing leaning films. And so I think there's a difference, I think. Like, so I think maybe it's a good business model. Like, maybe they make money. Like, I think, obviously, there have been a lot of what we would say financially successful faith-based films. Whether or not those are good films, as like, is it good entertainment? Is it like worth watching? That would be another thing. Like, is it like good artistically? That's a different story, I think. And so kind of parsing that and not to be too like down in the weeds with it, but I just don't know that I don't necessarily accept that that's the binary, that it's you either make your own version of it or you tune it out.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, if you even just, as we should with all cultural engagement, base it in kind of the biblical model, what Christ taught and what the early church kind of did in a very even more antistically against Christian, they were killing Christians back then. I think you base it in there. And I don't think you see that same kind of reactionary, because again, like these two choices, which again we can apply to Christian films as well.
Yeah.
You can either tune it out or find alternatives. But the problem with that kind of approach is that oftentimes, and we've seen this with faith-based, not all faith-based, but a lot of faith-based kind of approaches to films in Hollywood, is that by creating sort of this separate anti-Hollywood, this sort of parallel Christian version of this, is that you're essentially doing the first. You're tuning out. You're sort of ignoring. You're not engaging with it in any kind of meaningful way. You're sort of just trying to. And I think we have a picture we can throw up, which at least to me summed up in a lot of ways sort of why I think this is kind of the wrong philosophy behind it. Even if they have every right to make these kind of films, and like Sam said, there's going to be a huge market for this. But this is the Rotten Tomatoes for the Run, Fight, Hide movie. But again, this screenshot is actually used as like the Facebook ad. It keeps popping up as I was researching the film. So now Facebook is, there's force feeding me this ad, and they're kind of marketing it with this picture, which again, at first, if you're not kind of familiar with Rotten Tomatoes or some of that, it would seem odd to market your film with a 25% positive critic score. But again, that's kind of the point that they're going for. And again, the audience score is obviously way higher, and kind of the way that, with the text that goes with the ads and how they're unpacking this is kind of, well, Hollywood is so anti-conservative, anti-kind of faith and all that. But, the people are showing that this is actually what this actually is a great film. And Again, some of this is a pet peeve to me. And I think especially the more kind of as a rule of thumb, if you're not familiar with these sort of scores, is the more niche of a film you get, the less like an audience score has meaning.
Yeah.
Because again, it's the same as most faith-based films have similar kind of critic receptions, where critics are usually hard on kind of faith-based films, where the audiences love it. And is it because this objectively they're amazing films? Well, most of the time it's just that the only people seeing these more niche films are people that are prone to, like in this case, people that are subscribed to the network.
Right, like they already have like a built-in incentive to see this film, and they also like, I think the people who see these films and also sort of the faith-based films, like they're like, I think like almost a super fan of it. So it's like it almost doesn't matter the content of the film, the quality of it, the acting, the storyline, the plot. Almost none of it matters. It's almost just it's a virtue signal.
And I think also just like a support of the creator. I think
right,
it's like,
to say, we want more of this kind of stuff because of what it represents and what it means and the belief behind it, rather than the actual piece of art itself.
Yeah, and again, I think, like we said, we haven't seen this film. It might be, worth that 93, not necessarily bashing on film, especially one we haven't seen, or, even the faith-based.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, some of these films could be really, really good. And it's not to say that they're all just horrible and they're just, propaganda for a particular worldview. They may be very good, but I think, like you said, the marketing of this is to say, hey, Hollywood hates this, so, you should watch it and love it. And, let's just make our own Hollywood. And then essentially what you're doing is you're creating the echo chamber and worldview bubble that you hate seeing in Hollywood. You're just creating it in your own image and, around your own worldview. And how does that actually, again, going back to the more Christian view of it, like how does that actually filter out into the world if you're just creating these silos of entertainment to keep in your little bubble of Christendom that never reaches out to the world?
And I think you nailed it too. You kind of end up creating, in a lot of ways, the thing that you're against. It's a very kind of one ideology, one worldview focused. I think they're right. Hollywood critics and stuff are unfairly biased against kind of faith-based content. Yeah. But at the same time, religious Christian reviewers are hard on Hollywood films that have secular ideology. I think it's we're both kind of playing by the same rules. And I think this sort of the reactionary side of, I think if we really do as Christians want to engage and influence the culture, kind of creating kind of a parallel that has all the same kind of issues and limitations of what we're going against. Kind of, this is the anti-Hollywood entertainment industry, or this is they're the secular, so we're going to go do our own thing over here. Both sides kind of end up just preaching to the choir. And I just don't think that ultimately, this resources and all that, the kind of the alternative version of it is never going to be able to just kind of go blow for blow with mainstream Hollywood producers, creatives. You're not going to be able to kind of create something that's equal to that. And again, we can move on to the next topic, but there was a verse that stood out to me. I was just reading just the other day, and it's 1 Corinthians 5, 9 or 10. This is Paul writing, kind of calling out some issues that were in the church. He said, "I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral or are greedy, swindlers, or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world." Again, he's speaking to a different issue than entertainment, and he goes on to kind of point the finger at the religious people, but kind of saying, the calling of the Christian is not just to kind of dislocate yourself from anything that sort of goes against your belief or might be wrong. Obviously, there's purity and holiness and all that. But he's saying to do that is to be out of the world, and we've been called to go in the world. And I just thought that verse kind of, even if it's touching on a more specific kind of with immorality issue, not entertainment, should be more of our guiding principle than sort of let's let's take it to Hollywood and let's do an alternative. But again, let us know what you guys think. Again, if you've seen the movie, and also just sort of what is our role? Do you guys think Christians should kind of create a subculture of entertainment, or is there a way to kind of be in the middle where we're actually engaged with the culture, with the kind of the mainstream media, yet coming at it as a Christian? So the second thing I wanted to talk about was this sort of the issue of escapism. Again, this is kind of a more general, not necessarily tied to a specific news story, but we just did, if you guys haven't seen on the channel, I just did a review for the David Copperfield adaptation, also for Emma, which are both kind of British escapist movies.
Very much so.
And part of the appeal for those kind of movies is to escape the world we live in and just sort of go into this, not probably even all that realistic presentation, kind of more idolized. But this is sort of the issue of escapism as far as Christians. I think a lot of Christians would be, and have been, as I've kind of talked with people and other people engaging with pop culture, there's sort of this it's like a taboo. People look down on, they don't necessarily want to brag about all that they watch TV too much or movies, or that they enjoy that kind of stuff. It's like it's almost like you're somehow failing in your duty if you're kind of escapist stuff. What do you think? Is there a place for escapism as Christians?
I think certainly there is. And I think it's the same sort of with the idea of having a day of rest. I think in many ways is like, you just need to carve out time to unwind and to not be, so high geared up all the time. And so I think there is a place for escapism in that. And it doesn't, I think where you draw the line it would be the issue. Like, I don't think escapism is bad. Like, I don't think it's wrong to watch a fun movie or to play a video game for a couple of hours. But is that like, are you neglecting things for the sake of escapism? Are you are you using escapism to avoid other responsibilities? I think there's a place for it. I guess I would say in moderation.
Yeah, and I think kind of the way I would kind of navigate this, is it okay for Christians to be into pop culture and excited about checking out the new Marvel movie, or should we, is that kind of pulling us away from, being on our knees in prayer and feeding the poor? And, is that really intention? I think the two distinctions that I think are important for this is, one, kind of what we mean by escapism. How are we escaping? Because again, there's differences, and then kind of how much of a role does that have? And probably one of the best discussions, again, this is no surprise if you guys have been following our channel for a while, that I love Tolkien. I go to Tolkien for a lot of just sort of philosophy and theology beyond just his stories. And he had his famous, this is an anthology, it's in this book, his classic essay on fairy stories is well worth the read, even if you're not into like fantasy literature, because really he's just walking through the role of like imagination and kind of escapism as people of faith. And he distinguishes in that essay between two different kinds of escapism. One, the flight of the deserter, and the second, the escape of the prisoner. He said both are escaping from something, yet one, the deserter is escaping from duty. It's something that's kind of repugnant and morally wrong. They're running from where they should be, whereas the escape of the prisoner is, obviously if they're wrongly imprisoned, we're not talking about like a jailbreak or anything, was what he's using that. But the idea that, is it wrong for someone that's kind of trapped in a, here's his direct quote. He says, why should a man be scorned if finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home? Or if when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls. And he says kind of, if we're in this sort of, again, he's making an analogy to, we're in this sort of this difficult world. This isn't our final home, our destination. We're destined for heaven and perfection, paradise. So should we be scorned for taking time to kind of project beyond this world? What do you think is the difference between, like, what does that look like in like a more, just like a practical for Christians and for us today between those two?
Yeah, well, it does make me think of like Tolkien and Lewis's writings. Their fiction because I feel like if you're reading, Lord of the Rings, or if you're reading Chronicles of Narnia or something, that sort of escapism, I feel like is elevating, I think, your thoughts. I think there's something elevating about those stories in particular, especially for the Christian. And then I think there's other types of escapism that maybe is less elevating. So I think there's like different qualities of escapism as well.
Yeah, because obviously if you're reading, a Charles Dickens novel, isn't the same thing as escaping into like a 50 Shades of Grey or some trashy, romance novel, or, a good kind of thought-provoking, this kind of refreshing show is different than maybe watching like, season 24 of The Bachelor. I think it does matter. And I think sometimes we talk about, as Christians, we sort of label everything escapism. But there's a difference between kind of what we are doing to escape. Is it edifying? Is it rewarding? Is it building us up? Is it causing us to kind of get a different view of reality, to rethink some stuff? Is it just sort of making us feel encouraged and feel better to go back out and kind of face reality? Or is it kind of like Tolkien would say, the flight of the deserter, where we're just doing it because we don't want to deal with what we're called to deal with, or the world, and we're just going to kind of live in this false kind of fantasy reality.
Yeah, and I think those two distinctions, the flight of the deserter makes me think more of like, if the amount of time that you're escaping, I feel like that leans more. Like if you're escaping more frequently, I feel like that maybe tends towards the flight of the deserter, whereas if you're escaping less frequently and more intentionally, that may be more like the escape of the prisoner. I don't know. Let us know your thoughts on that as well. But I think I do feel like if you're just spending copious amounts of time escaping, or however you're escaping, I think there is it kind of contend towards that flight of the deserter.
We'll get at that in a second too. But I think the part of it too is like whenever you kind of, especially as someone like me, or I'm sure like you, we're obviously engaged in pop culture, and I love stories, we love shows and movies, and you kind of, one of the criticisms you get is that it steals, as a Christian, it steals your time away from things that really matter. And again, that's true. But kind of the pushback a little bit that I give to that is that there are a lot of things that we do in our day that could be spent in more kind of meaningful kingdom work.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you're going to go to the street and feed poor people, or take care of widows and orphans, does it matter that you showered that morning? Like, is it not better to take that 30 minutes and put it towards, could you get by with 4 hours of sleep and have 3 more hours for the gospel instead of sleeping until, again, we're making those decisions all the time. And part of it is because, like you said, we're not created, physically to go 24/7 nonstop. Again, your body breaks down. And again, mentally, it's the same thing. Spiritually, I think, it's the same. We're not created to do that. We have to make some of those decisions, between things that are probably more meaningful, but just unsustainable, as opposed to, so again, it's not necessarily a choice of, do you watch a Marvel movie, or do you, fulfill the Great Commission? It's not that kind of binary.
Right.
You can do both, but I think it's like it comes down to how much of a, is kind of escapism. Is it just sort of a refreshment to get back into action and kind of fulfill our duty as Christians in this world? Or is it more of like a posture or habit
or a crutch?
Where like reality and stuff is sort of the thing you just got to do now and then, out of necessity, but then you come home and just binge Netflix all night. And I think at that point, we are falling short of how God has called us to.
Definitely.
Here's a comment we have. So I think the stories of Scripture can offer a type of escapism. I'm being transported to a different time in history, or even in heaven. Revelation feels like escapism. And again, I think there's that's true. I think there's a lot of I think the Psalms, as a reader of the Psalms, I think also just as like David, or the ones that wrote the Psalms, are in their own way a type of escapism. That it's a lot of them are pretty dark and lamenting, or else they're kind of, they're celebrating, kind of a lot of them using a lot of metaphors, and you find a lot of, and I think even in some ways maybe a little not quite the same thing, but even just Jesus using stories rather than just straight up, kind of gospel preaching, because being able to kind of pull people out of sort of just, kind of disarm them a bit with the story, actually helps them to understand truth to a better degree rather than confusing them to. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And, something I just thought about was, do you think all art or good art, is escapism in some way? Like, shouldn't art take you out of your current reality? And so, like, and we can probably table this for another day, but I just had this thought of thinking, the good art, the good video games, the good movies, the good poems, the good music, I think at least for a moment will transport you from your current surroundings and your current circumstances, your current stress, whatever. And so would good art be some sort of an escape?
Yeah, and I think again we can maybe unpack this. In
just something we can.
But again, I think that's part of the problem too when we almost approach as Christians, when we approach kind of culture and art and movies and books, almost as like cultural homework. When we're not necessarily going because we love literature, we're going because we want to kind of read into it some political thing, and we want to just find a good quote that we can use. And I think you almost kind of get a lot less of the power of kind of what escapism is good for, because you're trying to bring your reality into the kind of that escapist art rather than kind of using that to get a different view on reality. But anyway, let us know. Like, I think obviously where you draw the line, like how much is too much. I don't think you can find.
Yeah.
You definitely can't find that in Scripture. So I think it does come down to kind of a wisdom issue, as far as is 1 hour of Netflix enough to kind of get you recharged? That comes down to kind of a personal thing between you and God. But I do think how we are choosing to escape, and then also kind of how much of a foothold in our life, kind of how we're using that escapist time, makes all the difference, and not just sort of one blanket down with escapist art. But this week at the Collision, and we got a couple things, cool things coming up. Again, there'll be an article probably dropping tomorrow or the next day, kind of unpacking some of the stuff that I talked about in the last episode, as far as is Netflix turning us into robots. I kind of get maybe a little deeper into that. What does it mean when we have so much technology and entertainment that, rather than offering us freedom, we're actually almost like enslaved to it, where we can't keep up. We're overwhelmed by so many options.
I know. I'm going to have to quit my job just to keep up with all the new Netflix offerings.
Yeah, I know. Like they said, a new movie dropping every single day of this year. And there probably about 3 or 4 of them will be decent. But again, so how do we navigate that? At what point do we just need to step away and kind of not engage with that? So again, I wrestle with some of that. And then if you haven't checked out on our YouTube channel, I did a review for, like I said, Emma and David Copperfield, 2 great British stories, both books that I've actually just had recently read. So I break those down. So if you guys are curious,
period dramas.
So if you guys are curious about some British drama and romance, encourage you guys to check out those reviews and let us know what you think. But what are any kind of final just sort of observations, things going on in culture this week?
A couple things. One, I noticed that WandaVision started on Disney Plus. Have not watched it, so I know still less about it. But hopefully we'll check that out soon. I'll have to give a report on that. Have you watched WandaVision?
I haven't, and the previews did absolutely nothing for me.
Yeah, I just don't. And
I was waiting for it to be some huge bomb, and then I've heard good things about it. Again, I'm not huge plugged into like the MCU like a lot of people. I enjoy it, but I'm not I'm not super eating up every little bit of Marvel content coming out. So it seemed a little kind of on the fringe, but yeah. But again, if you guys have checked it out, maybe convinced me why I should give it a chance.
Yeah, me too, because I haven't been convinced yet. So, and it's free to watch, and I was just like, I just don't know if I want to dive into that yet.
Maybe I'll wait a couple episodes and be able to watch more of it all at once.
Yeah, and then the other thing would just be the crazy drama with GameStop and hedge fund managers. That's just been kind of oddly refreshing to just kind of keep up with that and just see what happens next. So if you haven't paid any attention to that, then Google GameStop.
It's a nuts, it's a crazy story. And I'm not a financial kind of person to understand all the intricacies of it, but just sort of the surrounding, with the video games and the company and some of that. There's a lot of pretty crazy and amusing stories that have kind of circled around this.
What about you? What have you?
A couple. First,
this week.
I think I was corrected. It says Dig in One Division. It's very unique, pretty short, so it's not a big investment. Maybe I will. I know my wife, she's always down to watch pretty much anything. I'm usually the one that's more hesitant, so maybe I'll at least check out the first. I've been told to watch the first about 3 episodes and then see what I
Make
think.
up your mind.
I think Monty, he says it's every week for Netflix movies, not every day. So again, if that's right, then that makes a little more sense.
Yeah, I think it is.
Maybe
Did you say every day?
I think I said every day.
Okay. I think it is every week. That makes
I'll
more
look into
sense.
that. But again, we don't need a new Netflix movie every day. Digestible. But something that I saw, that speaking of kind of Marvel shows, again, they're everywhere. Did you see, I think yesterday they announced Wakanda series.
I did not see that.
And again, a lot of these shows, like the Loki show, not interested in. The new kind of whatever, I forget even what it's called. Captain America, Falcon, Winter Soldier, whatever they're calling that. Not interested in that. But Wakanda series actually intrigues me because again, it's not based necessarily on a character. Obviously, we lost Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman. So I don't know how they're going to focus on that. But it's the Wakanda kind of Wakandan culture. And sort of setting it there, I think you could do some cool stuff with it.
Yeah. Well, having that sort of world within a world that that is Wakanda, I think is I think there could be a lot of interesting stuff happen.
Yeah, and it was just, it felt, the Black Panther movie just felt fresh. Obviously, it was a ridiculous success.
Yeah.
So again, I'm excited for that. Again, not super into a lot of the upcoming shows from the Marvel, but that one did stand out to me. I don't know. And again, Ryan Coogler, who directed Black Panther, is sort of overseeing it, and he's a beast. He's great. He's one of the star directors going right now. But any final thoughts or words for us to?
Yeah, well, I just let us know your thoughts on this whole idea of creating your own subculture of entertainment. Kind of back to our opening discussion on the Daily Wire's foray into entertainment and not just political commentary. So I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking as far as that goes.
Yeah, and again, we do have a final. Shelley says, I've been told WandaVision will connect to some of the movies. Really my main motivation to watch. Says she haven't yet. And again, that's actually almost my motivation not to watch because I get overwhelmed.
Don't care
I like the movies, but it stresses me out when there's like, keep up with, we're going to have a new movie every couple months, plus these shows. And if you don't watch them, and again, how they tie in, I don't think are going to be completely necessary, but maybe I'll try and check it out this week. And next week
Easter eggs are lost on me. So.
Next week I'll share what I think. But yeah, again, thank you guys if you guys joined us for the first time. Hope you'll join us again next week. There's always a lot of stuff in pop culture. Again, if you guys ever come across some question or some story that you're just kind of not sure how to navigate or how to approach as a Christian, send that in to us. Post it on our Facebook page. Comment on one of these videos. Again, we're always up for just sort of talking about whatever you guys are interested in, or trying to wrestle with, even if we don't have all the answers, wrestle with some of the questions out there that but again, if you haven't done so, subscribe to our channel, and we'd love for you guys to keep up with what we're doing. Make sure you hit that like button, but have a great rest of the week, guys, and continue to collide with the world for Christ.